This is CBN NewsWatch.
Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. We begin in the Middle East. Israel is still grieving after the Israeli army accidentally killed 3 Israeli hostages in Gaza. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is expected to push Israel to define milestones in the Gaza war when he arrives in Israel today. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has more in our top story.
Israel is in mourning over the 3 hostages mistakenly killed by IDF soldiers Friday. The hostages had spelled out a sign outside their building that said, "Save us hostages," in Hebrew, with leftover food. They were also carrying a stick with a white cloth and were unarmed and shirtless, yet they were mistaken for terrorists.
It broke my heart, broke the entire nation's heart, and our hearts go to the families at this tough hour. At this difficult time, it's important for me to also send support to our warriors. They sacrificed their souls to achieve a crushing victory over our enemies and to return our abducted.
In an address to the nation, Netanyahu said military pressure is necessary to free the hostages.
We will learn the lessons, we will apply the lessons, and we will not let go of the military and political effort to bring all the hostages home.
Israel is reportedly considering another temporary ceasefire to free more hostages. Hamas still holds more than 100 people taken captive on October 7th, more than 2 months ago. On the war front, Israel uncovered a massive tunnel close to the Erez crossing, the only place where Palestinians were allowed to cross into Israel for work and medical treatment before the war.
This is no ordinary tunnel. It's a city, an underground city of terror that Hamas dug and built instead of investing money in the residents of Gaza.
The 2.5-mile-long tunnel was 165 feet underground at some points, with plumbing, electricity, and communication lines.
The tunnel that was uncovered was used, among other things, to carry out offensive activities against our forces in the Gaza Strip. A few days ago, terrorists were also identified in the tunnel and were eliminated by the Israel Defense Forces.
Despite the tunnel and other revelations, pressure is mounting on Israel for a ceasefire. The United Nations Security Council could vote as early as today on a new ceasefire resolution drafted by the United Arab Emirates. U.S. Defense Secretary Austin arrives in Israel today, where he's expected to press Israel on its timetable for transitioning to a less intense phase of fighting. Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen met with his French counterpart Catherine Colonna in Tel Aviv, who called for an immediate ceasefire to free more hostages and deliver more aid to the people of Gaza.
An immediate truce is necessary.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will press ahead until its objectives are met.
We will achieve all of our goals, the elimination of Hamas, the release of all of our hostages, and a promise that Gaza will not once again become a center of terror, incitement against the State of Israel, and attack the State of Israel.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Here at home, a tense moment for Secret Service agents guarding President Joe Biden Sunday night. The president in Wilmington, Delaware, walking from his campaign headquarters to the motorcade when a crash was heard. Agents put the president into his armored SUV, then surrounded a car that crashed into a Secret Service vehicle, blocking the intersection, and ordered the driver to put his hands up. It is not known if the collision was intentional or an accident. The president and First Lady were unharmed. Severe weather and travel delays are in effect at the start of this week before Christmas. This weekend, millions of Americans were affected by massive flash flooding and high winds as a damaging storm moved up the East Coast. Now that same storm system is moving northeast with 2 to 4 inches of rain expected from Delaware all the way to the Canadian border. And more than 6 inches could fall in parts of New England with expected wind gusts of up to 60 miles per hour.
Fear, worry, anxiousness, just figuring out how we got to set up for the next storm and what time the high tides are coming.
The weather also caused hundreds of flights to be delayed at airports in Atlanta, Miami, and Fort Lauderdale. Moving now to a huge disparity in an historically overlooked group of people. According to the most recent research, black women and girls make up only 7% of the U.S. population. Yet in 2022, they accounted for 18% of all missing persons cases. As national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports, one state is taking the lead in tackling this issue.
In 2021, Minnesota launched a task force to investigate the state's disproportionately high number of missing and murdered black women and girls. The results uncovered a disturbing trend of violence and a failure by state and local authorities to respond.
As a nation and state, we are facing a crisis, and it is critical and long overdue that we have investment in disrupting this crisis.
The following year, Minnesota's State Representative Ruth Richardson used the task force's findings to introduce legislation creating the first ever office for missing and murdered black women and girls.
This office is not about asking for more attention. It's about getting the same attention. And it's about having our lives honored in the same ways.
It's an unfortunate thing that there's an office, that we have an office that is dedicating thousands of dollars to a specific demographic.
Lakeisha Lee co-chaired the task force as part of a personal mission. Over a decade ago, her 18-year-old sister, Brittany Clarity, went missing. Lee says police brushed off the family at first. Then, 2 weeks later, they found Clarity's murdered body in the trunk of her car.
A lot of the work that I do is because of my sister's spirit. It's unfortunate that she's not here to witness this work, but her spirit is what keeps me going. And to know that others are looking to save and also solve some of the trauma that has occurred through history is amazing.
Minnesota's action is spurring others, with both Illinois and Wisconsin implementing task forces of their own. U.S. Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman tells CBN News the issue deserves national attention.
We need to put our resources, put our energies, put our intellect, and put our commitment into ensuring that our communities are safe for everyone.
Watson-Coleman, co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls, says there needs to be a central location where information coming from states can be accessed.
I think that on the federal level, we could have resources that did a couple of things, that became the central repository of information, empowered and even funded grants and programs in local communities that were designed to inform and to educate and to be vigilant, even support law enforcement.
Back in Minnesota, the goal is that the Office for Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls would eventually become obsolete.
I hope one day the office will sunset because we'll be able to solve this. We'll be able to dedicate these resources and make it part of what's normal in society.
Now that the bill creating the office has passed both the State House and Senate, Minnesota's Department of Public Safety tells CBN News the office is in the early stages of launching. The first step, finding someone to lead it. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, we sit down with Fox News anchor Brett Baier. He talks about his new book, To Rescue the Constitution, George Washington and the Fragile American Experiment. Stay with us. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. As Americans, we can sometimes forget the enormous price paid by the Founding Fathers in their fight to break away from Great Britain. They risked everything to create a new nation with a Constitution that has stood the test of time. Author and Fox News anchor Brett Baier says current leaders could learn something from those brave men, especially First President George Washington. Wendy Griffith sat down with Baier to talk about his new book, To Rescue the Constitution, George Washington and the Fragile American Experiment.
As an author, Fox News anchor Brett Baier seeks to bring historical figures like Patrick Henry and Paul Revere to life. This time around, in To Rescue the Constitution, he focuses on George Washington, who, according to Baier, is the only one who could have convinced a ragtag army to fight the British and believe they could win.
He had this ability to fire them up, and he had an ability in imposing this belief that liberty was worth fighting for. These guys, some of them didn't have shoes. They had bloody feet in the middle of Valley Forge in the winter, and yet they overtook the British forces.
What was it about George Washington, about his character, his person, that was so unique that, you know, was the glue that held everything together?
George Washington was this stoic figure who was well respected, and in his silence, he found common ground with the different disparate groups to be able to link everybody together for the good of the country.
As a man of faith, Washington also believed God was on his side.
You look at the miracle of bringing together all of these people and ratifying this document around a very tense time, that had to be a divine intervention of some kind.
And the fact that he even survived, because he wasn't just commander-in-chief from afar. I mean, he was on the front lines with his men, and he never got injured.
Yeah, and that also is pretty divine intervention, you would think. You know, it's a lesson for our times that you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to hustle and have faith.
And that belief helped Washington and his army to defeat the British. But even with a Declaration of Independence, the newly formed United States of America appeared anything but united or independent.
That time right after the war, it was really split, and people were wondering whether the U.S., which was not even the United States at that point, was going to go back to British rule.
Despite all this, Baer says George Washington held the country together, and in 1787 came the drafting and signing of the U.S. Constitution.
It's a unique document in the world, and there are a lot of people who say it needs to be adjusted and doesn't work right, but if you look really closely, it's held the test of time, and it has been a living and breathing document that enabled our country to operate in liberty.
What can our leaders in Washington, and really what can all of us learn from George Washington?
Dissent is okay. Don't be afraid of what feels like a very partisan time of different opinions, but listen first and try to find some common ground. Washington did that better than anyone.
And your book is called To Rescue the Constitution, and you believe that George Washington was the rescuer?
He was the rescuer. He's the reason that we have a Constitution. He is the one that essentially got it across the finish line. And without George Washington, we wouldn't have a country.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Washington.
Still ahead, we sit down with John Burke, the author that inspired the new documentary called After Death. Stay with us. Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. New York Times bestselling author John Burke is a major part of the film After Death from Angel Studios. The film was inspired by one of Burke's books on near-death experiences, and he joins us now in Studio 5 for a look at the film and his latest book, Imagine the God of Heaven.
I think the near-death experience is where science meets religion.
So my introduction to you is After Death, the film. How did you get connected with that project?
There is a process of dying during which I feel the near-death experience occur.
Well, after I wrote my first book on this subject, Imagine Heaven, Stephen, the producer, lost his brother-in-law, and he saw me on a TV show, got Imagine Heaven, read it, and contacted me and said, and this needs to be a film.
I can't be dead because I've never felt more alive. The first person I saw was my grandfather. He extended his hands to me and said, "Welcome home, Donnie."
How do you feel seeing that project completed and watching?
I think it was a great introduction to the reality of the life to come. I think it helped a lot of people, and I think it's going to help a lot of people who are skeptical realize that there is actually real good evidence that there is life after death.
You were in the hospital bed, right? But you had left your body.
People don't believe you when you say the story, but it's just so real.
What really convinced me is that when they would come back, they actually saw what was going on in the room.
This book, Imagine the God of Heaven. Take me inside this. What happens inside? What are we seeing? Who are we hearing from?
In Imagine the God of Heaven, really what I was trying to do is show the story, the attributes, the character, the heart of God. There's a ton of scripture in it, so I'm really weaving you through the scriptures, but illustrated through 70 people that I interviewed from every continent on earth, who when they clinically die, when their heart stops, no brain waves, some of them for minutes, some for hours, and yet when they come back to this life, they talk about not only the beauty and wonders of heaven, but they talk about being in the presence of the same God, this God of light and love, who's not an impersonal force, personal, knows them better than they know themselves, a love that they say our word love doesn't even work for how wonderful it was.
Naturally seeing you write these books and do these interviews, be a part of a film, it just makes you wonder, so what happened in your life that made this so fascinating to you? You didn't have a near-death experience.
No. It was my story of coming to faith. My dad was dying of cancer decades ago, and someone gave him the very first research on near-death experiences, the book that coined the term. I saw it on his dresser, I read it in one night, and my thought was, wow, could this actually be evidence that this God afterlife stuff is real? And for 35 years, I've studied over 1,000 near-death experiences, always curious, like how do what these people are saying and what they agree on what they're saying, how does that align with what the scriptures say? And that's really what I'm trying to do in my writing, is to show that not always the way they interpret what they experience, but what they report that they experience aligns amazingly with what the Bible's been telling us all along.
What's the impact on them in terms of this experience? Does it usher or move them to a similar place? What happens?
Yeah, almost, I would say 90%. It's intense life change. When they come back, God wants to see, are they going to seek Him with all their heart? And when they do, they find Him. And, I chronicle people in Imagine the God of Heaven from Hindu backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, Buddhist backgrounds, atheist, agnostic, Christian, all over the world. And I would say 90% of them came back seeking, and they did find Him. What I pray people realize if they read Imagine the God of Heaven is, why wouldn't I trust Him with everything? He is the love I've always wanted.
Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. The familiar song, What the World Needs Now is Love, is proving relevant through the work of 2 Regent University graduates. The Love Your City project is helping the once hostile Vietnamese government become more welcoming to Christian churches, even attending the recent Christmas festival in Hawaii. Lucille Toulousan tells us more.
More than 14,000 from different Christian denominations attended the recent Christmas Peace Festival in Vietnam's capital of Hanoi. The day-long affair featured family activities, talent shows, and evangelistic plays. It culminated with praise and worship, followed by American evangelist Reed Saunders sharing the gospel. More than 1,000 came forward to receive Christ. 10 years ago, Christian events like this in communist Vietnam wouldn't have happened. But in recent years, local government officials have joined the audience. This year, the Vietnamese police even hosted a Christmas dinner for all the pastors, symbolizing respect and understanding between the police force and the religious community. Hanoi International Fellowship lead pastor Jacob Bloomberg attributes this breakthrough to the Love Hanoi campaign, which their church began in 2012.
Whenever you meet government officials, we were not asking for permits or for other things. We were asking how we can love their city And I think over the years, that really has made an impression that we as Christian foreigners are there to contribute to society.
Through the years, the Christian Church has developed good relations with the government through projects such as cleaning up streets and bridges, conducting workshops, and other community services. Love Hanoi also provided platforms for churches to partner together in expanding God's kingdom by expressing the love of Christ in the different spheres of society. For Love Hanoi to be duplicated in other Vietnamese cities, the campaign has evolved into the Love Your City movement.
With the Love Your City movement, not only is the Christian Church gaining favor from the government, but most importantly, the church is being known for God's love, and many Vietnamese are experiencing His love.
When the Hanoi International Fellowship began in 1995, the government did not allow Vietnamese to attend the foreign church.
So at one point, while at a cafe, I asked the colonel, who was my liaison with the city police, if it was okay to have Vietnamese attend our church. And he just spontaneously said, it's okay if you take care of their spiritual health, it's okay.
Pastor Jacob and his wife Linda credit Regent University because they completed their master's online, which has helped them serve in Vietnam for over 26 years. Master's in Education for Linda.
I'm very grateful that Regent was at the forefront of online education well before it became a thing, and allowed us to continue to work in ministry, to raise our family, and live in Asia, all while doing our master's degrees.
And Masters in Organizational Leadership for Pastor Jacob.
So that really was a key for me and a great learning experience in leading such a diverse congregation.
And to inspire and convince people that to love with the love of Jesus is all it takes to transform a city. Lucille Telusan, CBN News, Hanoi.
Major breakthrough in Hanoi. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Or you can talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great week.